Hi class, this is Sungah and today I'm going to present my exhibition project. So this semester one word kept coming back to me is resistant. We saw it in Julie Dash's Illusion where black people carved out space for themselves inside a Hollywood system that refuses to see them as fully human. And we also saw it in Bassem Youssef's television program where Egyptian citizens use humor and satire to reveal the truth to political power and their political oppressions. And we also saw it in the Silence Equals Death poster, where the LGBTQ plus community demanded that silent government acknowledge during the AIDS crisis as they lost lives. Each time resistance looked different. None of them were only fighting for rights or representation or political change. They were fighting to be felt, to have their pain acknowledged, and make the world stop and say this matters and you matter. This exhibition, I want to talk about grief as an act of resistance. Not every death has been considered worth mourning. Grief of the poor, the colonized, the sick, and the silenced has been dismissed, suppressed, or erased throughout history. One of the most radical acts a human being can perform is to mourn openly despite all pressure to remain silent. Those left behind brings together 5 works from 5 different cultures and 5 different centuries. The courage of saying this loss matters despite the world denier is one of the most courageous things a human can do. In Victorian England, epidemics were everywhere: diphtheria, cholera, scarlet fever. That was not a distinct possibility, but a neighbor next door. Ironically, however, even as deaths became so common, they were slowly being pushed out of hiring a professional agency to handle the funeral began to sprout, and the death of the poor had already been a secret before cameras. Portraits were unaffordable for most of the people, so in society their deaths were never recorded, remembered, and erased. Then in the mid-1800s, as photography became more popular and grieving parents, spouses, and siblings turned to photographers for one last favor. The children posed as if they were asleep, 2 girls posed with their dead mother, and the woman's cheek had been tinted while her decreased toddler remains pale. This picture is not how scary they were, but how loving they were, and these families were not obsessed with death. The people who had never had a portrait was claiming that he deserved to be seen. They were resisting being erased. What may seem unsettled today has been an indelible act of love for Victorians. The pictures are saying this man existed, this man was important, and will not be forgotten. Grief is a record and a resistance her. If the first artwork says this man existed, the second one says something angrier. It was created by a woman who experienced the deep sorrows not only as an artist but also as a first-hand witness. Katzen Kollwitz's husband was a doctor who cared for poor families in Berlin. Every year she saw working-class mothers lost their children from disease, malnutrition, and poverty. No one painted those deaths. No one commissioned portraits of the children. No one considered their sadness deserved to be a subject of art. They were only working class. But Kollwitz was different. For this work, she used herself and her 7-year-old son as a model. The image is a variation on the iconic scene of the Christian Pietà, Mary holding the body of the dead Christ. The traditional Pietà offers grief that is serene, composed, and almost beautiful. Maria's face is calm, Mary's sadness is peaceful. But in Kollwitz's work, her sorrow is dignified. The mother in this painting is naked. Her body is not embracing death, but a raw, almost animalistic refusal. She is not embracing death. She is fighting with her whole body. The lines are dense and rough. Kollwitz pressed sandpaper directly onto the metal printing plate to create this jagged, unresolved surface. Because this kind of sadness is never smooth, Kollwitz brings the holiest image in Western art the most dignified image and fills it with the sadness of a poor woman the world considered insignificant in black and white and with sadness with resistance. She says this pain is real and you can't turn your eyes away. The Victorian photography and Coleridge etching were acts of individual resistance. What happens when it's not once but the sadness of an entire culture? When Spanish colonists in the 16th century arrived in Mexico, their purpose was far beyond mere conquest. They tried to replace the entire spiritual life of indigenous people. Even ancient ritual honoring the dead, which had existed for more than 3,000 years, were banned. They were declared pagan. Those who did it were punished, but tradition survived. Dia de los Pueblos Ofrenda is a ceremonial altar traditionally set up between October 31st and November 2nd every year. It is covered in cempasúchil photographs and offering of food and personal objects which believed to guide the souls of the dead on their way back home. The ofrenda is not a monument to loss, it is table set for a guest. Ofrenda goes further, insisting that death should be recorded and that grief should be seen. It is not just about remembering the dead, but also about rejecting their absence. The dead are not forgotten, they are just somehow somewhere else. And every year during these dates, the door opens and they are called home. Despite centuries of colonial rule, forced conversation, and suppression of Aboriginal language, religion, and culture, families built an altar every November. It is not just sadness, it is a resistance passed down from generation to generation. Ofrenda was recognized as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity by UNESCO in 2008. It was already being protected by communities long before an institution recognized it. Not because someone told them to, but because stopping meant losing to the colonists. Ofrenda says, "You can't take away our dead from us. Not then, not ever." In the 1980s, thousands of Americans were dying from AIDS. The society first publicly mentioned the word AIDS was in 1987, which was 6 years later the epidemic began. This was after a lot of people had already died. There was no national mourning. There was even no official acknowledgement. The silence was saying it all. These lives do not matter. These people do not deserve to be grieved. Felix Gonzalez Torres lost his partner, Los Raycock, in 1991 in that silence, and he responded with one of the quietest and most heartbreaking words in the history of modern art. He placed individually wrapped pile of candies, each of which is colorful, on the floor of the gallery, and audiences were encouraged to take one and can put it in their pocket or eat it. The pile weighed 175 pounds, which represents Raw's weight. The pile got smaller and smaller as audiences took the candy. Then the gallery refilled it so that it came back to its first 175 pounds. It kept shrinking and coming back, like a body that keeps breathing after losing everything, like sadness, like memory. The government refused to acknowledge these deaths. Society looked away, and Gonzalez Torres walked into one of the most prestigious spaces in art and laid his sorrow on the floor for everyone to see. He made something sweet, quiet, and completely negligible without giving political speeches. And then he made the audience complicit. Everyone who took the candy became part of Raw's story. Everyone who carried that small bright wrapper out of the gallery carried a piece of that grief with them. Gonzalez Torres did not just mourn publicly, he made public mourning unavoidable. You will carry this sadness together whether you want it or not, because it belongs to all of us. That's what the resistance is made of candy. For our final work, we traveled to Joseon-era Korea. Joseon was a thoroughly socialized nation. The status of being born Yangban, Jeongin, Sangmin, and Chomin determined everything: what you could eat, what you could wear, where you could live, and even how much you were allowed to grieve. The Confucian Joseon mourning was controlled by strict social. The death of a yangban was honored with months of official mourning and elaborate ritual. However, the lower the status, the less authorized they were to mourn publicly. Also, women were not allowed to participate in the funeral. They could not grieve freely and stand by their sons when they died. The sorrows of a servant's death and a slave's death were limited and sometimes not allowed at all. Society was saying your sorrow is as important as your status. The state recorded the death it considered worth recording. A king's funeral filled hundreds of pages of official documentations. A servant's and slave's death as nothing. This painting exists as resistance. The Kamnodo is a Buddhist ritual painting created to guide the souls of the dead towards salvation, offering sweet dew to all suffering souls, including the lonely dead and the hungry ghosts, to relieve their hunger. Its upper register shows Buddha descending from heaven. Its middle shows monk performing ritual, but it is the lower register that stops us. Here are the people the state forgot. Funeral procession winding through villages, mourners bent over the dead, figures weeping openly in the streets. These are not lawyer funeral, no official documents record this death. No law stipulated how long these people were allowed to grieve. But someone painted them, and in doing so captured the sound, gok of ritual wailing. It is the full body cry, the chest beating, the voice rising beyond what the class system permitted is written into every bent figure, every open mouth in this lower register. Even the state that controlled mourning could not silence them entirely. When the class system says this is how much you are allowed to grieve, raising your voice beyond that limit was an act of resistance. Our sorrow is greater than you have allowed, and we will cry out loud. This is resistance. Those Left Behind is designed as a virtual exhibition accessible from both the desktop and mobile. Visitors move 5 rooms in order along guided linear paths. Each room corresponds to a piece of work. Each room is intentionally designed to be minimalist. There are no distractions. There are only images, texts, and one question for visitors to pause and think about. So room 1 is going to ask about how you ever felt pressure to hide your grief. What did that cost you? Room 2, whose grief have you witnessed being dismissed or ignored? Room 3, what tradition or mourning, if any, did you grow up with? Room 4, have you ever shared your grief with a stranger? What happened? Room 5, who in your life has never been given permission to grieve openly? This exhibition does not ask you to study your grief at a distance. It asks you to recognize it. The voice of the curator is provided with optional voiceover in every room for accessibility and for those who want to experience the exhibition as a walking feeling, not alone. Sound plays a quiet role throughout the exhibition. Most rooms are mostly silent. From room 5, Kamnodo room, there was faint collective wailing, not to tell the audience how to feel. It was to remind them that this sound has always existed. At the end of the 5th room, visitors reach the final landing page. There is a closing message and there is only one blank space underneath it. Whose sadness have you been living with? Visitors can leave their answers anonymously if they wish, and will then be shared with all visitors. The exhibition does not end up with the curator's conclusion. It ends up with the audience's own words. Because that's what this exhibition was trying to saying from the beginning, make grief a communal thing. This issue is still important in 2024. Now, as we still live within the problem this exhibition deals with. The average funeral holiday in the US is still 3 days. Our world is still mourning the deaths of millions of people caused by a global pandemic. There have been many deaths that have been politicized, scaled back, and passed without public mourning. As the world unfolds, the number of deaths grows through our cell phone screens in a matter of minutes. We live in a culture where we pretend to be strong, move on, and be productive even in the middle of loss. All five paintings in this exhibition span 5 centuries, but they speak directly to the present. This exhibition is for them, and it's for everyone who's heard that grief is too big, too long, too loud. This project is not intended for professionals, it's not academic, it's everyone who loves and has lost it. There is no more universal audience than that, and the message I want them to take is simple. Your sadness is not a burden. It is proof of love, and it is always, always an act of resistance. And this is the works cited that I use for all five artworks, and you can look through it. Thank you.